Alrighty, welcome to the Excitable Soul podcast, everybody. Here we're interested in all things purpose. We want to know where and how people find meaning and connection in their lives. In every episode, we will be hearing the real life stories of how people have uncovered, understood, and unleashed their own unique sense of purpose. Our hope is that we can all learn from the journeys of our guests so that we can all better find a sense of purpose in our own lives. I'm host James Glover, performance coach and purpose nerd. I'm incredibly excited to be exploring these stories with you. So let's get going, shall we? All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Excitable Soul podcast. And regrettably, I'm being joined by Rebecca again for one of our kitchen table conversations. And this one feels like it's going to be more sibling rivalry than ever before, because if you just been anyway party to the 30 seconds before we press go on the recording, I was getting grief for not having really paid attention to our sibling WhatsApp chat. And I've got to be honest with you, I don't want to stand for it.
I'd really be careful, James, about picking your battles, because I will wipe the floor with you on this one, and you don't want to look silly on your own podcast. That's all I'm saying.
It's true. I don't want to look silly on my own podcast. You're right, and I fully believe that you can and would wipe the floor with me should you choose to. And this is in stark contrast from where I was expecting to start on this podcast, which is actually you've had your hair cut. It looks ace.
Yeah. Thanks.
But instead of that being the start point, the very fact that apparently I didn't notice that you shared a picture of your haircut on our WhatsApp has started something of a debate.
And a whole story about it. Like, it was a whole conversation, which, might I add, Joseph replied to. So you just look bad in comparison.
Yeah.
Especially now that you're like, it's like that never happened.
I've straight up no recollection of that whatsoever. And actually, I think it's potentially a good segue for us into kind of our area of discussion today, which is storytelling. Storytelling is part of meaning making, and therefore how storytelling is fundamental in our ability to uncover, understand, and really unleash our sense of purpose. We're fresh off the back of having run one of our executive purpose immersion programs, and we've kind of spent that time really in this territory of kind of data collection, and the data being the experiences that people have had that have really shaped who they are, and then wrestling with the way in which those experiences are playing out in this moment and how they can start to utilize them going forwards in the future. And it's always really fascinating to us how you can kind of drop down through the layers of storytelling and kind of become more and more drawn in to understanding somebody and getting to know them and feeling connected to them just by them telling stories of their experience, which is a no-brainer, right? Because that's kind of how we've been creating connection and belonging for thousands of years. So we thought we'd chat a bit about it.
I'm really passionate about it, actually, on lots of different levels. Like, and this is the thing that I love about the work at the Excitable Soul, right? You can think on a surface level, oh yeah, storytelling's important. We tell stories because it mines information. But actually, when you unpick it, it works on so many different levels. Like, it is integrated into your identity. Like, you form your identity from making meaning in the world, from all of the stories, from making sense of the things around you, and you connect with the people around you by telling those stories, by getting them to empathize with you, and I'm sure that we're going to talk about it across this blog, but that works on a very basic level of I'm communicating with you, but on a psychological level, just so many different aspects to it. And also, I love reading. I love stories. And, both sort of fictional, non-fiction, talking to people and picking how they see the world. And I was thinking about this, James, a while ago, and it goes right back to like my fine art degree that was about language, that was about connecting with somebody. So yeah, it runs through this work and through me. I'm excited.
Well, I'm going to just probably be quiet for a bit and let Beck tell us all about stuff, which is great. Happy to do that, But before we do that, and before we dive into that, I think there is a very real world context that we need to kind of put this within at the moment, that stories shape our reality, not necessarily because they are based on fact, but because they help us make sense of what's happening. And the carnage that is the world that we live in, especially from a geopolitical perspective right now, is born out of people being able to tell stories that capture the attention and capture the emotion and motivation of individuals without there necessarily being any substance to them at all. And so when we talk about the realistic power of story, they can create divide, they can create fear, they can create animosity to the point of war. And what's really important for us to consider is that none of that necessarily is based on detailed factual information that is irrefutable by any person at any point in time. It can just be a fabric of somebody's imagination in the moment.
And often is, but there's a really good quote. There's a really good quote from Dan P. McAdams, and I'm going to keep coming back to him because I'm in the midst of his book, The Stories We Live By, and he says that stories are less about facts and more about meanings. In the subjective and embellished telling of the past is constructed and history is made. So you can look at that from a personal level of I'm making sense of my own life and I tell the stories from my perspective. So every single thing that I have experienced, another person that was there at the same moment in time may tell a completely different story about it. However, it's my truth, right? It's how I've seen it. So when I tell it to you, your understanding of that event is based on what I've said, unless you were there. So you're constructing history, but also right down to, I mean, I don't want to get political about it, but you have world leaders that just make stuff up, and there are people that genuinely they weren't there, or they haven't read around the problem, and therefore they take that understanding. You are assigning meaning based on somebody else's story. So like you're saying, the ramifications of how we make sense and how we tell stories is huge.
Yeah, and one of the great things about being able to differentiate the fact between facts and stories is that because we're meaning-making animals as human beings, because we're constantly trying to make sense of the world around us and our place within it, where there are gaps in fact, we fill it with story. So it's not the complete absence of fact. Often there can be some facts in there, and it's just us going, well, I need to understand where I fit with all of that. What does that look like? Which then is based on your past experience and a whole bunch of biases and assumptions that you're making on your worldview. Like, you are family to me, and therefore, if you tell me something, I have a greater level of emotional attachment to whatever it is you're telling me than some complete stranger that I've never met before. Especially when you say, "Hey, wow, you look good in that," or "You're the greatest. You're the greatest brother in the history of siblings," and less when you say things like, "You're wrong."
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely got a warped view of stuff there, given that you didn't even know that I'd got my hair cut.
Which is the point that we're making, right? Which is the point that we're making. Ultimately, if you think about it from a neuroscientific perspective, and if you use like perception science and, quote perception scientists and neuroscientists like Boiolotto, they would just tell you that nobody is seeing the world in the same way ever, and there's no way of being able to prove that we are, because you can't get in somebody's head. Like, your brain lives inside a dark box, and it's entirely reliant on its senses to put data into that dark box, and then it tries to figure out that data and go, "Ooh, look, a banana," or whatever it may be that the kind of the data is telling us. And we live in a rich, complex, multifaceted existence, and your brain is trying to simplify things down so that you can comprehend them and operate within them. So it is something that is a wonderfully designed evolutionary mechanism that can be hoodwinked very quickly and very simply.
Yeah, and it has different purposes, different implications.
Yeah, sure.
3 of which are a search for understanding. So making sense of an event, you kind of, something has happened. I have to place myself within it, and I have to understand that within a context. So you create a story, you create meaning around why you're there. In contrast to having control, so in the same sort of in the same sort of vein, things can happen through fate, right, or through circumstance, and often people assign a meaning to it so that they can cope. They create a story around it. I think that that's most prevalent if you get a serious illness or an accident or huge things happen. So you create a story around, like, that this was meant to be, or I felt like something wasn't right, or everything was just going too fast, and this was just a way of stopping time so that I could make sense and slow down and realize the things that were important. We're like, well, actually somebody would have seen the exact same event in a different way. And also for, like, to bolster your self-esteem, to understand where you fit within what you see as progress, I suppose. So you create stories in comparison to other people, whether that serves you well or not. Actually, I'm doing all right in this moment because Sandra down the road did the same thing and she buckled, and I'm still here and I'm still going for it. Or maybe I could do better because X, Y, and Z people went through this and they could, so it's all the time we talk back to it's meaning making, but it's meaning making for different situations, for different purposes, to give you a different outcome.
And maybe it's worth us separating out two things that can be conflated but actually are definitely different, which is the kind of the process of sense making and the process of meaning making, which is and I was talking to a good friend of mine who's been a guest on this podcast before, and he was talking about, I can give you the 7 stages of sense making from a learning and development and brain cognition perspective. And I was like, yeah, I bet you can, because actually there's some real mechanics in the way that the brain is trying to make sense of the data and the information that's coming to it. What we see and understand about meaning making versus sense making is that the meaning making is how we assign significance and importance to certain events or people or situations or circumstances. There is another level or another layer to the sense making process, which is of our choosing, but interestingly, not necessarily of our conscious awareness, because we can assign meaning to things reactively, and we can assign meaning to things in a way that actually is serving us at certain points in time, but then not at others, and not necessarily be consciously aware of the fact that we've gone, oh, that's really significant, that's really important, until way further down the track, when we actually pause and look back and go, why is it that other people's expectations are critical to me? At what point did I say that was meaningful? And there's something in your kind of sense making journey where the validation, the appreciation, the recognition, the lack of those things from somebody else created an emotional reaction and response. And the sense making was, shit, the absence of that is painful and the presence of that feels really wonderful. So let's have more of it, please. And then because we haven't gone, oh, right, there's a part of this which creates a sense of belonging to others, and that's critical for me and my survival as a human being, and therefore I should really think about how and where I am getting that kind of connection. We just go, ooh, yeah, meeting the approval of others is good. Do it, do it, do it, do it. It gets to the point where it becomes out of hand. And all of a sudden, what you think about yourself doesn't matter, but what other people think about you is the difference between, positive and negative in all kinds of painful and horrendous ways.
So this is where it takes a bit of a shift, right? So far we've talked quite a lot about how we construct stories, I suppose, or use stories to make sense of the situation that we're either in or have been in over a period of time. We then also take stories as a tool, don't we? We use it in order to collect data. And it can have this really, really profound effect because, like you've just explained really eloquently, you don't often take the time or don't often consciously see where you have assigned meaning over time until you stop and share your stories with somebody else, or take the time to actually unpick your stories yourself. And this is where you start to spot patterns. The stories that I tell, there are reoccurring themes. Like the stories that spring to mind. That's just as important, isn't it? Out of everything that's happened to me, the myriad of stories I've got to tell, these are the ones that pop into my head. And it then becomes a tool that can be used. Do you want to explain a bit more about how we do that?
Well, and I think there are a couple of bits here that I get really excited about too, in that we fanboy, fangirl about Brené Brown every other podcast. At some point, she might hear one of these and just, graciously say thanks. But until then, we'll just get giddy about her work, where she just talks about stories of data with a soul, and the way in which we try to help people understand is that their experiences are the data, but when they tell the story of those experiences, what happens is they start to see the information that's coded and hidden within the experiences. And then if they tell enough of those stories, if there's enough data, the information starts to really turn into insight and knowledge. Like, oh, these are the repeating themes that just come up time and time again, which is where you can then start to find real wisdom in the experiences that you've had, and that kind of wisdom that you can then take forward and apply meaningfully into your life going forwards. You've got a really brilliant quote from Antonio Damasio, where he talks about storytelling is the solution to making wisdom understandable, transmissible, persuasive, and memorable. So if you get to the point where you've mined the data, you've got the information, you've started to see the knowledge, and then you can really feel and articulate the wisdom, all of a sudden the impact that has on you and others is, well, I can share it with you so you can understand me because I understand me. And it's persuasive because it carries weight, there's depth to it, there's richness to it, because there's emotion connected to it. And that's the thing that we remember as human beings, is when you tell me a story that feels like it's got soul, that's got emotion in it, it's going to hit me in the soul and provoke emotion, and therefore I'm more readily going to remember it. So the power in that process is colossal.
It's interesting that you say that, because you do genuinely feel what's being told to you in a story, what you read in a story. It's back to the mirror neurons. I learned about them and I was like, this is amazing. They're like neurons in your brain that literally mirror the emotion. And the studies that have been shown that when you read a passage that talks about physical pain, you feel that the same areas of your brain light up as if you were actually experiencing that pain, which is why when I'm listening to certain stories, we're in the middle of listening to a certain set of audiobooks. I'm literally in my car.
You're not trying to say dragon smut, are you?
No. So I was driving in my car.
Ladies and gentlemen, you want to hear a really, really awkward story. Beck and I are both listening to these novels by Rebecca Yarros, which are about a kind of a mythical. They're a cross between the Hunger Games and Game of Thrones, right? It's like they're brilliant and they're really captivating. But there's definitely a high level of kind of intimacy in some of the scenes. And so Rebecca and I were in the car together. We're both listening to them and we're driving down the road, and the chapter moves to one of these moments between the two main characters where they start to engage in the passionate act of love. And there was a moment where in my head I start going, yeah, I don't think I want to listen to this with my sister in the car. And then I'm like, no, I'm an adult. I'm nearly 45 years old and she's an adult too. And we're both parents. Like, this is just part of the novel. Like, be a grown up about it. And that particular thought lasted 7 seconds, because then it got even more graphic and I was like, nah, I definitely don't want to listen to this with my little sister. So I just turned around to Rebecca and I went, think I'm going to skip this bit if that's okay. And you just wet yourself laughing at me. I went, yes, that would be good.
it was Courage Chicken, wasn't it? Like who can last the longest? And then once you'd pulled the plug on it, once you were like, no, I can't do this, and you were pressing fast forward, like every time you took your finger off fast forward, and the words came out, and it's like, no, it's not over. Oh, press again.
The head of nothing.
Yeah. Anyway,
yeah. So
that actually demonstrates my point, because I was going to say, when I'm listening to it on my own, driving along, I'm like, kill him! You can take him down! Strike your lightning! Like this, like filled with rage, filled with like genuine bloodlust, which I would say was out of character. Some people might disagree.
Did I laugh a bit too hard though?
I would say it was out of character. But the whole reason for that is because I'm literally experiencing the things that I'm reading. Now the same thing applies. Stop laughing at me. The same thing applies when you're sharing your stories about your life, because they are just as engaging. So when you are genuinely listening to somebody and you are taking on board like the moments that they deem worthy enough to share, that they think are significant enough to recount, you're with them in that moment. And although people, and the more that you share, the easier that is, in the same way with a novel, you get more and more connected because you describe it in such detail that means that you can put yourself there. So the beauty of the retreats that the Excitable Soul does is it creates an entire environment by which it's A, this is a safe space, and B, you are cut off from everything because now is the time to delve into it. Like, I don't want the cliff notes. I want the novel. Tell me exactly why that story. How did it feel in the moment? Like, what is it about that? Which is why it's really good to share a story with somebody else so that they can be that critical coach, to ask the questions, to delve deeper, to make you kind of go, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I feel that. Tell me more about this. Like give me another perspective to that, because as you say it out loud, you're often going, yeah, I'm reliving that as I'm telling it, and I'm seeing this. And actually, you're right. In the stories that I've chosen to tell, this is something that I talk about a lot. And actually, there's a correlation between my bad bits, the not good moments, the stories that I want to tell that were hurtful, and they're hurtful because they are the opposite of the things that were really good. Do you know what I mean? So even in that, there is a theme, the absence of something, and when you tease out these things, you kind of go, these stories aren't isolated. They're very much so connected.
Yeah. So, ladies and gents, we've kind of danced around things a little bit here, but I, just to kind of summarize a little bit what we're trying to describe here is that the reason why we work with purpose is because it is a felt experience and just a simple, deep human need. We need to find meaning, and we need to feel belonging. And those things come by being able to reflect on the experiences that have really shaped who you are. And part of the way in which you can shape and understand the experiences that you've had is by telling the story of those experiences and being able to pick apart the elements of them that have really stayed with you because of their importance and their significance, whether that's positive or negative. And the process of telling a story is one that, from a neuroscience perspective, we're just proving out the things that we've known for thousands of years, which is we are conveying a colossal amount of information in a very, very efficient way. If the human being has evolved to do anything really well, we're an efficiency machine. we look for a way of being able to minimize the effort in stuff, because it helps us use our resources differently. So if you can tell somebody a story, which is a really effective and efficient way of us being able to communicate, and within that we're giving them information that's both intellectual, it's useful, but also emotive, so it's significant and it's feeling based and they're going to remember it, then that's a pretty good way of being able to transfer insight, transfer information. And that's just stayed with us for thousands of years. But the brilliant thing about being able to utilize this from a purpose perspective is that once you've started to get to that level of understanding and insight around what is really meaningful to you, where and how you have assigned meaning, there's that wisdom carries forward over time. As it was true in the past, it'll be true in the future. And so then you can start to think about going forward into the unknown with a sense of faith and belief in what might be possible, rather than just factually what is. Because as we discussed right at the very beginning of this podcast, most of the stories we tell aren't based in fact at all. And actually that kind of emotional resonance of, no, I really believe this to be true, means that you can go into uncertainty because there isn't any fact there either. So it's almost a future hack that we just don't make the most of as human beings, which is the tool element that we were describing back. What are the things that feel like they're really important for people just to kind of sit with and wrestle with and just kind of make these insights feel really real, Beck?
I think for me it's a couple of things. Firstly, it's a level of acceptance that storytelling is not indulgent. It's very much so a very human experience that you have developed an ability to do over time. Like, you can't tell stories or understand stories as a small child in the same way that you can like a story about yourself. You go through a developmental stages in how you are understanding the world beyond yourself, and that is okay. I think people do often, I don't want to talk about myself, or when they start talking about themselves, they then feel almost guilt. I've been talking about myself for too long, so I think that there is a huge element of don't feel like that. And
freedom, permission,
and that it's a really important thing to do, and that actually it doesn't matter where you are on this purpose journey, whether you haven't started it yet and you're intrigued, whether you've started exploring it but you haven't nailed a purpose statement, or whether you've been through the program and you kind of like, I've nailed what I think my purpose is, and you're navigating living with one. Stories still play a huge role. It helps to qualify your feelings about things. I'm having a gut reaction. I feel really upset about this thing that's happened, or I'm really excited about this and I'm not sure why. And when you play that back with almost like a lens of the purpose that you've developed, you kind of go, is it connected? Am I feeling excited because actually it's enabling me to do what I've already established is right at the core of me? Or do I feel bad because actually this isn't in alignment? And a very weak example of this is bringing it back to my hair, and you not having seen the WhatsApp group,
rubbing it in.
Just bringing it back any opportunity. When I went to the hairdressers, there was a really, really lovely hairdresser. I have a different hairdresser every single time that I go, and we'd been chatting for quite a while, and she asked me what my star sign was. I was like, oh, I'm Aries. And she said, oh, you are so an Aries, right? So I was like, oh, interesting. Not sure where that's going. What makes me an Aries? And then she went on to say, yeah, Aries are very... And then she did a facial expression, which it's a bit like this, which basically made that I looked stuck up, and a bit of a resting bitch face is what she was doing on her face. But then you get talking to them and they're lovely, the life and soul, doing something weird on the dance floor. And I sat there and went, wow, I'm not sure That's definitely an insult. like I am lovely. Like, you don't need to get to know me for me to be lovely. Like, I'm nice from the onset. So what's my face doing that doesn't suggest that? And I've told this story mostly to make people laugh. I've told it to everybody that would listen, because I'm like, this person thinks I look like this. But actually, when I play it back with my purpose statement, which is to creatively captivate so that people feel seen and can see. Why I think it's funny is, what are people seeing when they look at me? Like, at what point do I cut through that first impression to be able to actually engage with somebody?
Yeah.
And I think, as much as that is a silly example, that it is an example of how that works. Like, there's something intriguing about this moment. There's something about, and me just telling that story is to make people laugh, is to connect with somebody.
And yes, there is something funny about it, and you doing it to make people laugh. Totally agree. But also in you being able to recount it, and you being able to share it, and you be able to kind of reflect on it, that there's the opportunity there to turn around and go, maybe you're not doing anything, and this was about that person. So there is something here that you don't need to acknowledge, that you don't need to own, that isn't yours to carry, that is actually about them, and be able to confront that, because as many people would then hold on to those comments made by somebody else and internalize those comments made by somebody else and start to see themselves through the eyes of those people. Actually, you've just kind of gone to that place of gone, hey, I think I say my purpose is this, and I want to be able to do this, and is this a blocker to me being able to do that?
My face.
My face. So so that already you've started to go, how am I assigning meaning to what I'm hearing here? And it gives you the choice. And I think that's what's really important here is it gives you the choice. The other thing that's really important here is that I just checked the WhatsApp messages. Not only did I not ignore you, I actually responded and said how lovely your hair looked. However, I had 4 beers by that time because I was out on Saturday night, and therefore I have absolutely no recollection.
You've just increased the amount of beers that you had by that point, because you didn't have 4.
I know I had I had 3. I think because of where I was in the time, I think I'd had 4. And ladies and gents, if you are any confusion, there is a big difference to my cognitive capability between the 3rd beer and the 4th beer. What you should really be asking yourself is what happens between the 4th and the 5th beer. Now we're talking.
No one wants to hear that story, James.
No, they don't, or see it in action. Lordy Lord. Doesn't happen often. Anyway, I think we should probably call it there. For those that are still listening, thank you for staying connected to our opportunity for kind of really voicing how and why we think storytelling is just a critical enabler of people being able to find meaning and connection in their lives, and how that can shape their understanding of a sense of purpose, and how their understanding of their purpose can evolve over time. And so until next time, thanks, Beck.
Thanks, James.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Excitable Soul podcast. We appreciate your support and would love you to subscribe, rate, review, and recommend if you can. It makes a massive difference. Equally, if you're interested in uncovering, understanding, and unleashing your unique sense of purpose, or that of your teams, come and explore our purpose immersion programs at theexcitablesoul.com. We look forward to hearing from you there or being with you on our next episode. Have an incredible day.